Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья! После большого перерыва мы вновь встречаемся в нашей «Зеленой гостиной». У нас очень приятный повод. Большой театр готовит премьеру оперы Штрауса «Соломея» и ставит ее один из самых известных оперных режиссеров современности Клаус Гут, который согласился быть сегодня в нашей «Зеленой гостиной». Dear Klaus, I'm saying that after quite a long pause, we are meeting again me personally in this green room, and we are very lucky to restart this project with such a famous opera director as you are, as you came to stage Salome for the Bolshoi theater. And this project is our co-production with Metropolitan Opera. I was wondering how this idea came to you.
It's actually a longer story, because first I think it was Peter Gelb had the idea to take a Salome production I did for Berlin. Then Bolshoi joined at some point, and then I decided, no, if really these two fantastic theaters join in for a new production, first of all, it's boring for me to do the same thing. I need risk. And on the other hand, I found out that my interpretation, when I looked at it with a little distance, I noticed that it probably in some aspects, especially in aesthetics, it's referring to a time which is very specific for Germany. Also the theater where it was played in Berlin was from the 60s, and I'm referring a lot to the time of the 60s and the atmosphere of the 60s. And I was pretty sure that this was not so easy to translate either to Moscow or to New York. So I said at some point, okay, let's start with zero again. So
that was my other question, because I thought that when you're digging inside such a work as Strauss, Salome, or any work you're doing, you're always taking away superficial things and cliché, and you try to dig to the inner sense of the piece. So I thought if you already did this journey and you find something very true about Salome, how are you supposed to do in 2 years' time new interpretation?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, because I did a piece twice only 2 times before, because it's difficult. Somehow it's very difficult to do something new of something you were very deep in before. But it feels good at the moment. I think it was a good idea to do it again. In another case, it was with Così fan tutte. I did that for Salzburg. I did it also the Giovanni and the Figaro as a circle there, and then I said to the people from Salzburger Festspiele, I'm not happy with my Così. And they said, okay, let's do it again. So I did it another time for Salzburg, quite different. And I said, shit, I'm not happy again. And then Daniel Barnbaum offered me, as you heard, I'm still not happy. Let's do it together, new at La Scala, and you try again. And I tried again, I was not happy again.
Again, so we still have to wait for
Così fan tutte is, I'm not sure if I solve this in this life. With Salome, it's different. I had the feeling with Salome, I was on essential points. It could get much clearer and more efficient, what I want to say, and I think I'm on the right track now.
So on one hand, in the Bible itself, in New Testament, it's a very short story. I mean, nobody would have paid so much attention to this if not so many painters, authors, and Strauss finally, who worked on this piece and on this character. And I wonder why it trapped such a great attention, this Salome. Everybody is sort of mesmerized and wants to talk about her.
Yeah, of course, it's, I think, in the center of this piece, and somehow also in the center of the biography of Oscar Wilde, there is an enormous scandal in it. There is huge voyeurismus in it. There is something like, also Herodes says it in the play, in the Strauss play at some point, if you chop off the head of a man and you see the head besides the body, that's the weirdest thing you can look at. So it has many sources. It's the scandal, it's surrealism, it's cruelty, it's something about body and mind, the separation. So there's so many ways to look at this, and then there's also this strange Salome. Is it a girl? Is it a woman? It's a bit connected to this Lulu figure of also moral standards are completely in confusion with this figure. So it is something like it gives you a pain and arises thousands of associations. Just the simple fact, like you say in one sentence, the daughter asks her father to give her the head of Johanna, and just this thing. I'm not surprised the painters are inspired by this.
When I was on one of your rehearsals, it was very funny and touching moment for me, because you had numbers of small girls and you're supposed to tell them what is the story about. And
that was a tricky
and I was
moment.
wondering how you will tell to these kids from 5 to 12-year-old. But you were very good, as you said. She was a princess, wanted whatever she wanted was given to her, and unfortunately her father or her stepfather listened to her even in that sense, and when she asked to cut the head of somebody, they did. But to my mind, one of the main theme maybe, which still can stand, is the sense of innocence on one hand and great cruelty. Like innocence, but once you feel you are innocent somehow, you can be very cruel. I don't know if it's like this in your piece. Because many things I don't think can stand towards our time. For example, last year I was reading Stendhal, Red and Black, and it's impossible today. Yeah. You cannot feel anything towards these persons. There's many old stories in contemporary world, they don't tell us anything. But in Salome, somehow, there is this really, as you said,
no, in Salome, it's especially now the way I look at it in my interpretation. Salome is, for me, it's like nearly a key piece to modern psychology. So if you start asking, then it's getting interesting, because the surface is the scandal, it's the crazy image. But then if you ask, why is she asking to kill this man, and why is she like that? Why is she so cruel? Why is she so childish on the other side? So when you look at it, you suddenly find out, wow, it's probably quite a nightmarish childhood, because this girl was raised in a house where parents don't love each other at all. It's open hate in the house. At the same time, the stepfather, he's kind of building a castle to protect himself against the outside world, because it's this theme in the piece all the time. He hears the voices from outside, people screaming. He has somebody, a prisoner in his own cellar, who's shouting against him all the time. So he's full of fears, and at the same time he blocks out the outside world completely. So imagine growing up, seeing no normal person, only these two people. It's not really surprising that this child is going a very specific way.
That's for sure. And what was the family where you were raised? What was this family where you were born in Frankfurt at, I understand, 63? Now I think of this time, it's like only 20 years after the Second World War. What was the atmosphere in the city where you were born, and who were your parents?
I was raised in a more or less small town close to Frankfurt. And actually I was, it was quite a privileged surrounding. So maybe I even see some similarities to a certain degree, because I was raised in this quite wealthy surrounding in a city where you didn't really see a lot of the reality of life, and went to school there, and it started I don't know, at the age of 16, I was so hungry to find the real life, which was somehow I felt like hidden or was not shown to me. So it was really after I finished school, then I kind of provoked myself in going to places which would be the highest possible contrast to the way I was raised. So first was, of course, I had to go there, was a military service, but as I behaved very badly there, they put me in quite tough places inside the military service. So that was
You did military service?
Yes.
1 year?
15 months, yeah. So that was a tough time, like in a very quite a department where they put people they want to punish more or less for their bad behavior. So I had interesting contacts there, people like I never met before. But seems like this still wasn't enough for me, so I decided directly after that I was going more or less alone to New York for 1 year and directly moved to Brooklyn, like quite a wild area. So
it's like beginning of 80s?
Yeah. I'm just telling this now in detail because it's
very interesting.
As you asking, I think I can tell something about people who are, let's say, growing up in a too protected world, what they miss or what they need to find to understand themselves.
Quite daring. When you moved to New York for 1 year time, you studied there. It was not, yet that time it was not love for the theater. It was just hunger for the life as it is.
Yeah, it was. I started already with 15, 16. I started creating movies with a little Super 8 system. And so I was quite sure movie is my thing. Then I had also a lot of contact with music, but it was not really clear. So in New York, I studied, I didn't study, I was an intern at CBS. So I went to the publishing, to the TV production, to the news, to all of their departments to find out more what's my way. And let's say in a way, sometimes when I talk with my 21-year-old son, I tell him, well, my education or my life in the beginning was trying and making, no, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. So it was then after this, I noticed, no, that's everything feels wrong. And also New York, America felt wrong because it felt too superficial. So then I had a huge energy when I came back. I decided to get away from the superficial world I met there and did again the opposite. I studied philosophy.
That's what you studied in Munich. It was philosophy.
Philosophy, literature, theater.
All together. But it was like classical philosophers, like Hegel, like
the heavy
Fichte.
stuff. Yeah,
Kant.
The dry, heavy stuff. Yeah. So then I went to Munich and studied this, and then again after 2 years I noticed, no, wrong. I'm not the theory guy. I need
something else.
I need something real. Working with people, and I applied for film school at that time, didn't work. And then I was still in the film idea. I was a camera assistant and working as a camera assistant, and we were producing a production in Bayreuth, Wagner. And suddenly I came back to opera. When I was a child, I was at the opera.
Somebody was
quite
bringing you
often.
to opera from your family. Was like music lovers.
Yes, very much. And so I rediscovered suddenly opera, and then
In Bayreuth.
in Bayreuth, and suddenly it made like a click, because many of my passions suddenly came together. Because my interest in the movies was like images with music, not so much dialogue. And in opera, I also noticed it has like both. It has the language, the libretto. It has the intellectual dimension, but it also has a huge, through music and through the image, a huge ocean of emotions and unconscious, unclear worlds, where I always had the feeling that I'm able to move around in these worlds quite well. So I think that could be it. And then it was a lucky accident that August Everding, who was famous man at the time in Munich, he founded a theater school specifically for opera directors, which was the first school in Germany to study opera directing. It's very specific with a very profound musical studies.
So you can read scores.
Yeah, sure.
And it's like 4 years? How
4
long
years.
was 4 years.
And it was like with everything. It was with learning little composition, learning piano, learning singing, all these things, and also the theoretical things.
Very interesting.
So
just
that was
opera directors.
that took a long pass until I arrived there, and then it was like suddenly was like heaven, because it was tough before, because I was quite desperate, not finding my point, my subject. And then it was a very fascinating moment, because then after 1 year, it was the first time in a small theater that I had the chance to work with actors and singers and to do a little piece. And it was like nearly in the first rehearsal that I noticed, wow, I can do this. This is my language. So it was the end of a long searching journey.
And your way to deal with actors, as I was coming to some of your rehearsals, not very often that you are showing yourself. You prefer to explain, to talk, and at the same time I noticed that you are moving forward very fast. Just even after the first meeting, when you had the mutual meeting with everybody in Bolshoi, in a couple of days I went and already felt like people know quite well where they're traveling.
I probably started at some point in the profession, working in the profession, to prepare myself very precisely. So actually, I have in mind, or it's written in my score, like for every bar, I have an idea or I write something down. And then I go to the rehearsal and I start a dialogue, or I feel the atmosphere with a singer. And let's put it this way, if he doesn't come up with a stronger idea than my idea, I do what's written in my score. But when I suddenly feel it's a personality that with the score, with the music, with the piece has a own intuition, and the intuition is, I think, is interesting, then I forget everything that's in my score and I go free. So that's an advantage if you are doing the job for quite a long time. In the beginning, the first 5 years, I was too nervous. I was very stubborn and stayed at my score and said, now you do this, now you do this, now you do this. By now, I need very good assistance, because my thing is then I'm completely prepared. I sketch this very fast, and actually then I close my score and don't want to look at it anymore, because then I'm trying to maybe it's like a little bit, I created a sculpture that's still very wet and very rough, and you don't recognize the concrete thing. And then it's like the really interesting process is starting then. That's where I get excited, and where it's, for me, the first 2 weeks are really very demanding, and I don't like these first 2 weeks so much, because I sketch this very fast, and it's very exhausting. But then the real second process of creativity starts.
It's like different steps of inspiration. First of all, you're working with the score, with the piece, you're inventing the world.
And also I work a lot with my team. So I'm not this kind of director who says to the stage designer, this is the piece, I think, like one keyword, and then he goes away and creates a stage. No, with me, it's a very different, very long way, because we start like 2 years before, and we go every step together. So it's the stage design is also part of the process. It's not a separated invention by the stage designer.
So you're not coming to him and telling, I need table here,
no,
whatever,
no,
door there.
We have to find out this together. So this is the very first step.
Well, you have several collaborators, and then I know that for Salome you changed set designer, right? So how you make up your mind with whom you will work on this or that piece?
I developed now a system that I have to have an intuition what is the right answer to get to the center of the piece, because sometimes I think I make my life very difficult, because there are some colleagues that have a very clear style. So certain questions they will not ask themselves again. But I start really more or less at zero every time, because maybe if you also look at my productions, sometimes I work completely abstract. Sometimes I work highly realistic. Sometimes I work very surrealistic with the aesthetics. So my aesthetics change quite a lot. And the question, what is the right aesthetic for the piece, is only possible to answer if you know quite a lot about what you want with the piece. So yeah, I have this work with my dramaturg, who helps me a little bit there to find out who's the right partner. Also, that's again a step before.
The question was about your dramaturg, because it doesn't really exist in Russian opera theater, and in drama theater has a bit also different part. Why do you need a dramaturg? It's somebody with whom you need to discuss your ideas, it's somebody who is mentally close to you, or is somebody who helps you to dig the initial material, or what is dramaturg in your life? Who is this person?
I'm a big fan of the idea of dramaturg, but there is many different versions how to perform this job. But in an ideal world, the dramaturg at one point in the beginning is kind of helping opening your mind, like giving associations. Also, for example, the dramaturg for this production, also Yvonne Gebauer, I think she knows probably about every contemporary artist on the planet at the moment who's in a gallery or somewhere. She knows every film that's happening. So she's completely in a network of images, of associations to themes, where so sometimes she throws like hundreds of images on my table, so bringing and it's very important for me also to have these inspirations outside of the opera world. It's horrible if you're going too much to the opera, your head is much too limited. You will never get fresh ideas because it's old soup. So this is one example. The next one is that with a dramaturg, he's of course doing partly what I in earlier times did, all the homework with all the historical diggings. This is like more the boring part, but necessary part. But then I think the dramaturg is very important again later in the process, as my inner voice, or somebody who suddenly saying, Klaus, remember when we were starting, your idea was like this and this, and when I look at the stage now, I don't see that. So there's a problem. You should find a way to tell what you initially tried to tell, and I think to achieve this, you must do this. He maybe gives an advice. So sometimes my sessions with a dramaturg are pretty tough. So I tell everybody in my team. So in general, I try to take away fear from all my collaborators and to completely destroy any atmosphere of too much hierarchy, of too much. So in my team, even I'm interested in the opinion of the intern, what he sees. So I collect the moods that are in the room about what you see. And of course, that's quite demanding sometimes because there are many opinions, but at least then I filter them and can use it as an energy for my stage work again.
If you look back on whole your past, which is quite big in opera theater, you feel yourself some evolution as a director. You know that today you're staging differently, you're interested in different subjects and you're working differently, and maybe you look back on your very first steps in the opera and you think it's very, I don't know, superficial or simple for what you're doing nowadays, or you don't feel it.
Maybe I feel as a person and as, with also the success helps in that process, but I'm much more relaxed in a way that I'm still quite ambitious about what I do, but at the same time I have also more the ability to step back and to watch it with a bit more distance what I'm doing. And I think maybe what changed is that my productions to a certain degree, maybe they get a little simpler, but not in the way that simple is like superficial, maybe more in the way that by now my aim is it's not important that you know anything about the piece. It's not important that you even before read what's happening. My aim now is to invite people on a journey, but it should be, even if you cannot read, like I couldn't read Manon Lescaut, the subtitles 2 days ago, and for me it would be really the aim. It doesn't matter at all, even if you don't understand a word. You should understand the story, and it's not necessary the story that is the cliché story that you read in the summary at Wikipedia, but it is a story inspired by the music and the text, and this should be self-explaining. And if I look at earlier works, it's sometimes I think it's a bit more like this is this idea and this is this. It's like a collection of many ideas, but sometimes they are not really in a flow.
Sometimes when you listen, or when you're reading, or when you're watching people like Artaud, like Grotowski, or like even Brecht, for them theater, it's such an important thing. It's like a flame, it's like, I don't know, it's like a very mystical experience in a sense. And it feels to me that in opera theater, this kind of attitude towards the theater as a holy place is different or hardly possible because you have too many limits with music and emotions which is already in the music, and maybe you cannot dig it the same way you can do in drama theater where you have this, let's say, extra freedom. But for yourself, theater, it's like something to do for money, for pleasure. Of course, I understand through your past already that it was some click in your mind that this is something I should do in my life. But overall, theater, it's a path to find something deeper about ourselves or just a way to interpret something for the pleasure of audience?
No, for sure. For me, theater is first for myself. It's an extreme possibility to understand the world, to understand myself and my relation to other people, my relation to my surrounding, to the system I'm living in. So I'm searching for answers to these questions. For the audience, the same thing, because I think most of my questions are not only relevant for me. I think they are probably for many people. So I think opera has, I disagree with you there. For me, it's not the case that language speaking theater has so much more freedom. I think the opposite. It feels like it is because you're the boss of the timing and so on, but I see it different. For me, that's why I usually don't say the name opera. I call it Musiktheater, music theater. For me, it is a huge chance to have actually for the human being that is able to see, hear, feel things at the same time, and partly maybe even different informations at the same time that say opposite things. Opera can do this. Somebody is singing something, but you see the opposite, and because the director did it. This immediately opens a gap. This gap is interesting. What's there in between? And then you have the musical information that again creates something which the atmosphere that you cannot control. So I think that's a huge freedom of, and you need to get really, every artist needs rules, he needs limitations. So I'm glad for these limitations, and still the space to move there is huge. So I see it as a very open art form, and of course I would not talk like this if I would not do a lot of first performances of new operas.
That's what I want to ask. It feels like you have your duty towards the contemporary music because you're staging a lot of new pieces.
Yes. It was always, since I was young, I was like, my musical interest is from, I don't know, jazz, punk, reggae to Schönberg to Strauss to it was always the whole thing, and it's still like this. I hear huge. I go to electronic music festivals to Iceland. So I travel around to discover new music. Also, directing contemporary operas for me is something that has to be done, because otherwise we all end up in a huge museum. So even if some of the pieces, they will not be in the repertoire, it's still you must support this and to find out what's the language, the musical language of our time. What is, where are we going, where are we moving? The other part is that from time to time I also invent productions in a way that I For example, now it was planned, but with COVID it was cancelled. I was planning to stage with Jonas Kaufmann a production of Schubert Schwanengesang for the stage, and I do very often that I combine around a theme dancers, opera singers, actors, and do creations. So also to find out for myself where are the theatrical answers to new medias we're working with, to new influences we are in. So yeah, it's always kind of opening myself completely in all directions, and then I think I take something and go with this into a repertoire piece, with a different inner energy.
For example, one of your recent projects was this, I don't know exactly English title, Violet Snow, based on Sorokin text. How it come on?
That was a very actually amazing production because first of all, I'm a big Sorokin fan, so I love this kind of atmosphere in his pieces, and it was a very strange piece because it nearly didn't have any action in the traditional sense. It was, if you put it in a very simple sentence, it was snowing, and it was snowing, and it was snowing, and didn't stop snowing. And at some point you understand, oh, that's not normal. Something happened in the world. Because if it's still snowing after half a year, and the piece ends that there's suddenly a second sun coming up. So you get an atmosphere of how people are in this piece moving around and trying to find out where are we living and what's changing, and suddenly they realize there's like the insecurity we are in. I think it was a very good expression for that. And
in advance of COVID, which put the whole world under the big question. Do you have in your personal agenda kind of ideas that you've already been in Bayreuth, in Salzburg, in La Scala, in Paris, but like you have to be, for example, in Bolshoi or in some other big houses, like this is my list, I want to work in all these places through my life?
Maybe there's a little bit like a list, but I'm more or less through the list now.
Exactly.
For me, there are two categories why I work at specific places. One is that because I worked there before and I know the production circumstances are on such a perfect level, and it gives me the biggest possibilities to express myself. This is like one track. And the other track is that I'm an extremely curious person, and in a way here with Bolshoi, it works in two ways, because Bolshoi was on my list, and it's amazing to be here. But it's also, I have to say, these last 3 weeks here in Moscow, it's for me a very intense time, because I decided not to live in a hotel, to go outside, and I move around the city a lot, and I go very far out also of the city and look at things, and walk a lot. I walk like 2 hours every day everywhere. It's extremely stimulating, and it's really for me like a process of understanding a different mentality, a different place I've never been before.
It's your very first time in Russia?
Yes.
Very first time?
Very first time.
Did it break up some cliches of this country which you had in your childhood?
Yeah, a lot already.
Yeah.
Yes, a lot. And it was, also sometimes it's like a few days ago, I was in the strange museum about the Second World War, and there was one diorama. I spent, I think, half an hour there because my father was in Stalingrad, and he was after that 8 years in Siberia, and he never talked about it.
Wow, he spent so
Yeah.
many years in this country.
Yeah, and it was, and then there was this battlefield of Stalingrad. There was this, and I spent there endless time in that room because as my father gave me so little information, so only 2 stories about the war. He didn't want to talk about it, but I had this very strong urge also to understand through this image, to understand where he was, in what kind of situation he must have been there. And yeah, there was a very amazing moment. And it's not completely true. I was before in Russia, I was with my father, actually alone with my father. I was in St. Petersburg once. And it was also very interesting because my father more or less survived in Siberia because with a newspaper, he learned Russian in a very short time, and so he had a job as translator. So his Russian was still very good after, I don't know, 30 years when he came back with me to Petersburg. And for him it was very emotional because somehow he was in deep love with the Russian language, the literature, also mentality. Very strange after all he has been through. So it's also here sometimes, I think a lot of, my father died quite a time ago, but I've sometimes spent a lot of time with thoughts
What was
with him.
his profession later on after the Second World War?
It was an interesting story because he went to war like was 17 or 18, and then he returned very late. And all his friends and everybody already was nearly finished with studying and everything, and then he made like a, I don't know, like a enormous energy was inside him from all this time not being able to really to do something. So he made like a incredible fast career, and he, yeah, in a very short time he became from really nothing, nobody, head of Deutsche Bank. Yeah, there was enormous how he, what kind of power he developed after these 10 years of a very strange time.
I think it's great that you could come with him like this to,
Yes.
to Leningrad, St. Petersburg, to be with him. It should be very special. When I think about the Second World War, I always thinking, because you know, German was so popular in Russia, so many people spoke German. My grandparents learned German in school, and of course everybody was under all these philosophical and literature of Germany. And even at 1943 in Leningrad, through the siege time, they were publishing Goethe Faust. I was reading this book with very nice words like, this is a genius of human mind, Goethe, and we should print it and we should read it. So it was a big device between the war itself and great culture. And I think so many people, like my grandfather, like your father, they were young people manipulated, right? From
Yes.
both sides, only
Yeah.
manipulated. And nowadays, when I look the world around me, I'm always asking myself, how much are we manipulated?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how we can stand against it somehow.
That's the big question. But it's
maybe.
also somehow, yeah, it's a big question, but it's also about, I was just, 1 year ago, maybe that's also why I'm very curious walking around. I'm preparing a Kovanchina production.
Yes, with Yurovsky, I read.
With
It
Yurovsky,
didn't happen
and so
yet.
it was, for COVID, it was
Postponed.
But I started to read about Russian history, and it's about also this theme of repetition of very similar processes. So I think it's really fascinating and very important and interesting, this theme that's going through, this search for the specific identity of what is the specific of our culture, to understand it, and also in the themes of influence, what means if opening not to lose your identity, or if I mean, there seems to be like a world language at the moment through the internet and through the networks. So that's an interesting question for each individual. How can I survive with my what's specific for me, or what's just opinions that I'm constantly loaded up with and consuming? And it's also the question about nations.
We're losing it. I think we're becoming humanity somehow, finally, in the 21st century. I understand you have several boys, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but in some of your interviews you said that you have several boys. How old are them? How close you are to them? And how close they are to the art of opera?
So I have 3 children, one boy with 5 and one girl with 14 and one bigger son with 21. The biggest one is actually at the moment going into the theater world, but as an actor. The daughter is pretends not to be interested so much, but I can see when she visits a performance or rehearsal, she's completely inhaling it and expresses herself a lot in dancing. And the small one he's a really fan. He's really since he was 3 or something, he's in a rehearsal and he wouldn't never ever say a word or is completely focused. So that's quite amazing. And yeah, it's not in my profession, of course, it's not easy. I miss them at the moment, for sure. Actually, I plan to go home for a few days for the birthday of my daughter. But at the moment, I'm a bit scary if it's a good time to travel. I might miss the final rehearsals here.
If you look back on your whole career, which is very impressive, for yourself, what are flashbacks as your highlights?
For sure, one highlight is, even when I said, like before, the Così fan tutto was a big fight, but this miracle that happened in Salzburger Festspiele, that I worked with my most adored conductor at the time, Nikolaus Hanenkur, and that with Anna Netrebko and with Christine Schäfer and Boris Guffes. So they were like the best artists that I can possibly think of in one production. I think it happened that even though it was huge stress, opening of Salzburger Festspiele, all these people, all these eyes on you, and at the same time with this production I found a own planet for myself, and then again similar thing happened with my Don Giovanni there. So this was a bit like a present and a big joy that even though it's such a focus on you and on you feel that people want a success, and still you have to be completely stubborn and say, I ignore all this, I invent a world for myself, and I work very focused on that, and I try to be not aware who's thinking what and what expectations are on this, and that this succeeded. That was a very nice thing, and also my Fliegender Holländer in Bayreuth was such a moment of a very specific interpretation under these circumstances. For sure, those were 2 big highlights.
And hopefully you will return to Bolshoi. We would hope so. And if you would return to Bolshoi, what opera would you suggest for the Bolshoi management to stage on our, I hope, historic stage?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about it. I would love to return. I think it makes sense that which is the case for Salome. I come here with something where I'm first of all, I'm completely at home in the Strauss world, and so many Strauss compositions. So I know how to move around. I know how to move around in the language. So I have the feeling I can, to a certain degree, it sounds a bit strange, but I'm a specialist on something which I bring here, and it makes a lot of sense. So I wouldn't think I should direct a Russian opera.
Mussorgsky.
So maybe I would say let's try something to go even more into our contemporary time, or to go to the language of the 20th century. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I hope you will return with this piece, which I don't know yet which can it be, but something new also for our historic stage.
Thank you for having me
Thanks a
here.
lot.
Thank you.